Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Alberta's Justice Minister is speaking out against the federal Liberals repealing mandatory minimum penalties for drug offences and gun crimes. Lethbridge College and Farming Smart are teaming up for a new research project to help canola farmers. And we hear from U.S. political reporter Lisa Daftari, who has an update on the devastating Texas storm which has left millions of people without power.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney announced today that 29,233 Albertans have now received 2 doses of a COVID-19 vaccine and have now been fully immunized. He says the province's focus moving forward in Phase 2 of inoculations is providing the same protections for those aged 65 to 74, staff and residents in supportive living facilities, and many in our Indigenous communities.
Unfortunately, that population of Indigenous Albertans has had much worse health outcomes than the broader population, much lower average age of hospitalizations, and typically more serious consequences from COVID infections. And so we are following the scientific advice to address a younger age cohort amongst Albertans from Indigenous backgrounds.
By the end of Phase 2, we would see over 2 million Albertans being given the opportunity to have a vaccine. So this is a big deal. And what that means is that we took this seriously months ahead of these vaccines for Phase 2 being able to even be provided to Albertans. We've made this announcement, but with the careful and thoughtful advice that we are receiving from the National Advisory Committee on immunization, as well as our own advisory committee here in Alberta on vaccines. And when we get to the end of Phase 2, whether there's even going to be need for prioritization in Phase 3 is quite frankly going to be up to the federal government.
Chandro added that Group B of the Phase 2 rollout of vaccine distribution will include Albertans aged 18 to 64 who have underlying health conditions. Alberta's Justice Minister is angry. Casey Medu is upset that Ottawa introduced legislation to repeal mandatory minimum penalties for drug offences and some gun-related crimes. Minister Medu says his concerns with the new Justice Bill are the reduction of tough sentencing provisions for gun crimes. If passed into law, the legislation would give judges a lot more discretion in sentencing. Federal Justice Minister David Lametti stands by his government's plan to repeal mandatory penalties for drug offences and some gun crimes. He says they do not make our community safer and unfairly target certain minority groups.
Its singular accomplishment has been to incarcerate too many Indigenous people, too many Black people, and too many marginalized Canadians. Facts are hard to argue with, and when it comes to conservative justice policy, the facts speak loud and clear. It simply did not work.
A Southern Alberta UCP MLA is not happy with Ottawa's proposed legislation giving municipalities the right to implement gun ban bylaws. Michaela Glasgow, the MLA for Brooks Medicine Hat, has tabled a bill that would amend the Municipal Government Act to state the municipalities do not have the power to pass laws on firearms unless authorized by the province. Glasgow says this proactive step is necessary to protect the rights of responsible Alberta firearms owners and is similar to legislation recently passed in Saskatchewan. Glasgow is not only an MLA, but she's also the chair of the Alberta Firearms Advisory Committee. Legal Aid Alberta wants to extend its services to better serve areas like Lethbridge. They'll be launching a virtual service at noon on February 24th. Youth criminal law expert Karen McGowan says there are a lot of misconceptions when it comes to teenagers getting in trouble with the law. She says more and more parents need to be equipped with the proper resources to make informed decisions on the best ways of helping their children.
If you have a young person who is being arrested by the police, they have an upcoming court date, parents can call us anytime and we can walk them through every single step of the criminal justice system so they feel more comfortable. Because I think a lot of parents are really agitated. They don't know what's going on. The youth system's a little bit of mystery. By talking to a lawyer, we can, alleviate some of the concerns that parents have and assure them that, there is a path to a future for your child and here are the resources that can help you. And if you need a lawyer, we can certainly help you appear in court, represent the young person, whether it's from a bail hearing up to trial, sentencing, whatever the case may be.
Registration for the virtual event is now open at legalaid.ab.ca. An Edmonton pastor remains in custody after he was charged with breaking Alberta's Public Health Act and refusing to agree to the conditions of his release. Pastor James Coates was charged with 2 counts of contravention of the Public Health Act and failing to comply with the condition of his undertaking. Now, a convoy of support will be leaving Lethbridge for Edmonton this Saturday, demanding his release. We caught up with one of the organizers and why he feels Coates needs to be set free.
We the People, YQL, and along with myself, the representative of our group here in Lethbridge, we're making a pilgrimage towards Edmonton for the Walk for Freedom or Jericho March. It's going by several different names. And the reason is because we're bringing in multiple groups from all over Alberta to represent Alberta as a whole. Our main focus is to fight for our rights and freedoms, particularly our fundamental rights and freedoms that is being slowly eroded under the guise of the pandemic, COVID-19. And so we decided a couple of months ago that we were going to try and bring our groups together on February 20th at 3 p.m. on the steps of the Edmonton Legislature to fight for those very rights and freedoms. The freedom of assembly, the freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and of course, the freedom of association.
A new $3.8 million initiative by the province will help Albertans with language barriers gain the skills they need to build careers in our healthcare industry. The 2-year pilot project integrates English language learning with healthcare aid training, enabling new Albertans to access the specialized education they need to become successful frontline healthcare workers. The province has been running short on frontline workers. Now, the initiative will support 324 students over the next couple of years and help Alberta meet the growing demand for frontline healthcare workers. A successful pilot will also provide a model to expand integrated English language training to other programs and professions. Lethbridge College and Farming Smarter are teaming up for a joint research project. As Micah Quinn explains now, the initiative will be funded to the tune of $75,000 a year by the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council. An additional $19,000 will also be provided by Farming Smarter.
The Applied Research and Development Grant will allow researchers from Lethbridge College and Farming Smarter to study canola yields by using precision planting and strip tillage.
This project will be starting this spring. So with that grant, what we're ended up doing is hiring a technician through the college, and they'll be working with us on this project, the project lead. And yeah, so that'll be for the next 3 years, I think 3 locations, so we'll end up having nine site years of data at the end of the project.
Cole says that strip tillage can trace its origins back to the Corn Belt in the United States.
For them, traditional lots of tillage type systems was causing issues with erosion, degradation of soil quality. So, being able to move towards a system where you're not tilling the entire land, but little small strips. So in those cases, they're probably tilling like an 8-inch wide little strip, and it has a knife opener. Usually it has a couple of discs that forms a bit of a berm, and that allows the seeds sort of be up top and in a nice location.
The demand for canola is expected to rise by 26 million metric tons by the year 2025, and this research will help producers to increase their production.
As you may know, that canola is a major oilseed crop on Canadian prairies. To get our goal for 2025, we need to increase our yield by 35%. And right now, the current average canola yield is 2.2 megagram per hectare. And our goal is to increase to 3 megagram per hectare.
In 2020, Farming Smarter and Lethbridge College agreed to a 15-year deal that will build on the work that the two partners have already done and continue to do in the agriculture industry throughout southern Alberta. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
If you are a Lethbridge and area artist, the city is calling for your help in developing a public mural. It's called the Mural Pilot Project. Now, the city's public art program and Heart of Our City have teamed up since 2020 to find local buildings to add this art to and add a little extra flavor to our city.
A public art program in Lethbridge has a wide variety of different types of art, murals, sculptures that really bring different opportunities and ideas into that public discourse in really accessible ways that are colorful or vibrant. Some are thought-provoking, and really altogether the public art collection helps make Lethbridge a really unique and distinct place, because all of these works of art are one of a kind, and all of these works of art are, you know, what help make Lethbridge such a great place.
Applications are now open at publicartlethbridge.ca until March the 19th. The best curlers in Canada will square off in the Scotties Tournament of Hearts tonight in Calgary. 18 of the top women's teams and coaches are in a curling bubble, getting ready to compete for a national title. Now, for months, many of these curlers haven't been able to train, but Curling Canada says this year's Scotties is not short of compelling storylines.
You got the reigning, and it starts right off the bat tonight. You got the reigning World Junior champions taking on the reigning Canadian champions. Mackenzie Zacharias from Manitoba taking on Carrie Anderson. So two great storylines there. But I think, you know, the one that a lot of people will be tracking will be, of course, Jennifer Jones. She's got 6 Scotties championships. If she wins this one, that would be her 7th, and that would make her the all-time winningest player at the Scotties Tournament of Hearts. And, you know, anytime there's history on the line, that's always exciting to watch.
The winning team earns a spot at the Olympic trials in November and will also play as Team Canada at the Scotties next year in Thunder Bay, Ontario. It is 38 days until Easter, which means Lent has officially begun. It's an important time for people in the Christian community, but in response to COVID-19 safety measures, many will be practicing traditions in a different way.
The core of Lent, I think, transcends all time. So the core of what we're doing doesn't change year to year, decade to decade, millennia to millennia. However, my guess is that there are many more people who are sensing loneliness and fear and frustration and suffering. And in that way, I'm almost wondering if we're better primed to understand what Jesus did for us. He left the perfect relationship with God and came and took on human flesh and walked among us. He understands our walk better than we ever can imagine. And I think this Lent, I hope we can draw near to God in a unique and powerful way.
Lent officially comes to an end at Easter on April the 4th. Many of the federal Conservative politicians have said that the abortion debate will not be reopened. Now, there's a group in Canada which says it needs to be. Ruth Shaw is the executive director of the National Campus Life Network, and she says the abortion debate should never be closed.
There are women who are being trafficked who have abortions. There are women who are in abusive relationships who are being pressured, and we can't effectively help any of them because there's this sort of blanket over the whole thing. So, long story short, they're wrong, and the more that they try to say the abortion debate is closed, the more that we'll talk about it.
Watch the full interview with Ruth Shaw from the National Campus Life Network as she discusses how they're reaching university and college students with their message. That's coming up later in our program. Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister's plan to buy its own supply of COVID-19 vaccine is being called a fantasy. A professor at the University of Ottawa says Providence Therapeutics of Calgary is too far behind in its development to ever catch up with current approved vaccines. Amir Adarand says the prospect of the province receiving the vaccine by the end of the year is, quote, in the realm of fantasy. Pallister defended the deal with Providence to purchase 200,000 doses of the vaccine with a 20% or $7.2 million non-refundable deposit. He says his government made the deal because delays in getting federally procured Pfizer and Moderna vaccine shipments continue. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe wants anyone traveling outside of the province to get tested twice for COVID-19. He says he won't make testing mandatory, but isn't ruling out a 2-week quarantine for those entering the province in the near future. Moe says the recommendation to get tested on entering the province and then a week later is aimed at keeping out more contagious strains of COVID-19.
Our strong recommendation against out-of-province travel is due to the unnecessary risk that you put yourself in and your family in to exposure of COVID-19 variants in other areas of Canada. So on your return home, you also then will place, yes, additional family members, your friends, community members, and people in the province to the very same risk of exposure to these potential exposure to these COVID-19 variants. For anyone that has left the province, we are strongly recommending now that on your return that you get tested immediately on your return.
Bridge City News has obtained some dramatic video of a fire in a large apartment complex in San Antonio, Texas. With extremely cold weather in Texas, fire officials say hydrants are freezing, leaving firefighters with little water to put out the blazes.
Our main concern is water supply. All these hydrants out here are dry. Well, they're not dry, they're just frozen, and there's no water. Down at the street, way down down there is some water. That's where we're refilling our tenders. That's our problem, is once we make a little bit of advance on the fire, we run out of water.
Sadly, millions of Texans are still without power due to the nasty winter storms which have hammered the southern state. The World Health Organization has its supporters and those who believe it should not even exist. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari says there are many Americans who are upset that the Biden administration has committed to giving over $200 million to the WHO, with some of the funding being funneled to a lab in Wuhan, China, which was the epicenter of the novel coronavirus.
Now we're giving money, U.S. taxpayer money, to that lab in order to be what? Again, non-transparent. In order to do what? What are we paying them for? What are we getting in return? I think, this administration has to go back to the playground where you give up your cookies, but you get a bag of chips. You can't just give up stuff for free and not get anything in return. It's a very basic concept, particularly with diplomacy. So yes, that's the latest. We're giving money to the WHO and to the Wuhan lab till further notice.
Lisa will also have the latest on the massive power outage in Texas affecting millions of people. That's coming up in the second half of our show. As Texas remains in the grip of that unprecedented deep freeze, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz was seen at the airport in Cancun, Mexico, after reportedly purchasing a return ticket home on Thursday. A reporter asked him what his plans were.
Go home and keep working to get the grid reopened, to get power restored, to get water back on. A lot of Texans are hurting, and this crisis is frustrating. It's frustrating for millions of Texans. It shouldn't happen.
It may be cool in some of the southern states, but mild right here in our region. The warmer temperatures continued across much of southwestern Alberta today, thanks to those very strong Chinook winds, and the windy conditions will continue. A full look at the weather picture is on deck. There's some good news and some bad news when it comes to our very strong Chinook winds. The bad news is that many times they cause migraines, but the good news is that we see much warmer temperatures during the colder winter months. Jeanette Rocher is back with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, how much longer will these strong Chinook winds be around?
Yeah, well, we're for sure going to see them until at least Monday when we get our nice double-digit temperature there. But you're right, as soon as we get the warmer temperatures, along come the Chinook winds. It comes with the territory of where we are, I guess. Speaking of winds, tonight 70 km/h wind gusts, overnight low of -4, not bad compared to what we saw last week. Into tomorrow, Saturday, sunshine, windy, gusts of 50 to 70 expected. 2 degrees is the high, windy and sunny on Sunday. High of 6 degrees, windy and nice temperature on Monday. 12 degrees is our high as we get that double-digit temperature. Hopefully it'll feel like 12 with all that wind though. Chance of flurries on Tuesday with a high of 1. 2 is our high for next Wednesday, and 8 degrees on Thursday. So all these pluses are certainly putting us in the higher than average range for this time of year, which is the high average is 2, the low average is -10. 15 was our high temperature back in 1977, and in 1986 we had our chilliest day on record, which was -37 right there. 7:34 is when the sun rose this morning. Sunset tonight just before 6 p.m. at 5:57. So not much longer. We're going to be in that 6 o'clock hour for our sunset. Lovely. Periods of increasing clouds with rain expected tomorrow on the west coast. Victoria's high 8 degrees, 7 the high for Vancouver. 2 is our high for Edmonton, and same thing for Calgary with a mainly sunny skies in Calgary. Calgary could get wind gusts up to 30 km/h. Not too bad though, and about 20 km/h wind gusts expected in Edmonton tomorrow. -2 the expected high in Saskatoon with sunny skies. Sunshine also in Regina. -1 the high there. -6 the expected high for Winnipeg. That looks like quite a nice temperature for Winnipeg for this time of year, but they are still experiencing the wind chill with the risk of frostbite. Chance of flurries in Toronto, -1 is the high there. 30% chance of snow expected in Ottawa tomorrow, -4. And a 40% chance of flurries in Montreal tomorrow with a high of -3. Over in Atlantic Canada, Fredericton also could have periods of snow, -4 the high there, -2 the high in Halifax. Halifax also under a special weather statement with accumulating snowfall starting today through the weekend. They could get 10 to 15 centimeters of the white stuff. Charlottetown expecting some flurries, -2, -4 the high in St. John's, Newfoundland, with some snow expected there as well. Speaking of snow, if you're hoping to hit the slopes this weekend, keep it right here because we got our ski report next.
Castle Mountain has seen 11 centimeters of snowfall over the past 72 hours with a 106 centimeter base. Nikiska received 3 centimeters with a 95 centimeter base. Sunshine Village saw 3 centimeters of fresh powder over the past 72 hours and has a 169 centimeter base. And no new snow for Lake Louise, which has a 130 centimeter base. At Mount Norquay, 4 centimeters of snow has fallen over the past 72 hours, leaving a 120 centimeter base. In BC, Panorama has seen 2 centimeters of the white stuff and they have an 82 centimeter base. Fernie received 8 centimeters of new snow and has a 100 centimeter base. And Kimberley received 2 centimeters of fresh powder with an 80 centimeter base. And that's a look at your Bridge City News ski report.
A survey released by a group representing Alberta's rural communities says energy companies owe $245 million in property taxes. The rural municipalities of Alberta says the amount of unpaid taxes has tripled in just 2 years. President Paul McLaughlin is urging the province to close loopholes that make it tough for communities to collect property taxes from oil and gas companies. The industry says municipal tax levels are too high given current depressed oil and gas prices. The largest steel company in Western Canada has been fined $935,000 after 2 workers suffered serious injuries in Regina. Evraz Canada pleaded guilty to violating occupational health and safety regulations in 2 incidents less than a week apart in early 2019. One case involved a worker who ended up pinned between a pipe and a steel plate, while the other worker was hurt trying to put out a grease fire on a piece of equipment. The Ministry of Labour Relations and Workplace Safety did not disclose the conditions of the workers. Transat AT says it gained some financial flexibility by extending the termination date of its $250 million short-term loan facility by 3 months. It is awaiting a European regulatory ruling on the proposed takeover by Air Canada. Transat says the facility has been arranged on October 10th with Export Development Canada and the National Bank of Canada as lead arrangers. The loan facility will terminate between June 30th and the closing of the agreement with Air Canada. Montreal-based Transat says the extension will allow it to secure financing with a decision from the European Commission expected by the end of June. Global food giant Nestlé is selling its North American bottled water brands for $4.3 billion to a pair of private equity firms. The brands include Poland Spring, Deer Park, Pure Life, and Arrowhead. They'll be sold to a subsidiary of One Rock Capital Partners in partnership with Metropolis & Company. The deal is expected to close this spring. Nestlé's North American water business has 27 production facilities and more than 7,000 employees. It sources water from 38 active springs throughout North America. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 110 points on the day to finish at 18,384. The Dow was up almost a full point to 31,494. The S&P 500 was down 7 points to 3907, and the Nasdaq was up 9 points on the day to finish at 13,874. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $1.68 to $58.84 US per barrel. Natural gas was even on the day at $3.08 US. Gold was up $8.58 to $17.8425 US an ounce, and silver was up 26 cents on the day to $27.29 US an ounce. Wheat is at $308 per metric ton, barley's at $313, canola's at $7.35, and corn is at $344 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 80 cents to $115.93. Feeder cattle were up 93 cents to $139.13, and lean hogs were down 43 cents to $84.50. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to $79.25 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney announced today that 29,233 Albertans have now received 2 doses of a COVID-19 vaccine and have been fully immunized. He says the province's focus moving forward now in Phase 2 of inoculations is providing the same protections for those aged 65 to 74, staff and residents in supportive living, and many in our Indigenous communities. Kenney added that Group B of the Phase 2 rollout of vaccine distribution will include Albertans aged 18 to 64 who have underlying health conditions. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will join us momentarily with an update on how the relationship between the U.S. and Iran has changed since Joe Biden was sworn in as president. Lisa will also update us on the massive power outage in Texas, which has impacted millions of people. Stay with us. Bitcoin has been in the news quite a bit lately, not just because of its value and the fact that Tesla will accept the cryptocurrency for its electric vehicles, but now Iran is turning to it. To chat about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Lisa, the Islamic nation is running to Bitcoin to what, evade sanctions and to help bolster their crumbling economy?
Yes, so this is a story we did at the Foreign Desk. It's interesting because I remember doing Bitcoin stories back in 2014, talking about how ISIS would use Bitcoin in the selling and transferring of artifacts that they would plunder from Iraq and Syria. And now, fast forward, well, it's in the news again, but it's on the radars of those trying to not have an economic footprint. So the Iran regime, for example, very much so would like to purchase things globally and work around the sanctions. Obviously, the central bank is not working or they're not allowed to receive payments. So this is a perfect way to evade the sanctions. And the mining is a great business. I had no idea before we did this piece, but Iran is now one of the top miners in the world for Bitcoin as well. So they've found out a way not only to make it benefit them economically, but twofold in mining as well.
Oh, that's incredible. Let's bring it closer to home for just a moment here. A voice of American conservatism has passed away. Popular radio and TV host Rush Limbaugh passed away at the age of 70, Lisa. It's not that old at all. Now, he had a lot of supporters, but at the same time, he could be a little controversial with many North Americans.
Yes, the most beautiful thing is that we always say people get all the honor after they pass. And someone of his caliber, fortunately, was honored by President Trump. He was given the Presidential Medal of Honor, which was placed upon him by the First Lady. I think he had said that that was the best moment and most, honorable moment of his life. And how beautiful that he was able to receive this honor before his passing. And obviously, all of the wonderful things that people on the right are saying about him. Unfortunately, on the left, they're not as well behaved. I've always found it to be in such poor taste to talk about the dead. But the media can't help themselves. The headlines are just egregious, calling him, all sorts of things that I don't even want to repeat, but you could imagine. But, for many who listened to him, for many who saw him as the pioneer of right-wing talk radio, television, media, just paving the way for the political party of the Republicans. I think this was a very big loss, and he's seen as someone whose shoes won't be filled ever again.
Lisa, after 4 weeks of waiting, Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu finally received a coveted call from U.S. President Joe Biden. Do we know yet what they really talked about?
Hal, we have some idea, but I will just say that the 4 weeks of silence spoke much louder than anything that was talked about on that phone call. This was not accidental. 4 weeks is a long time, particularly when you look at all the executive orders, when you look at all of the other phone calls made to adversaries. I mean, Biden spoke to the head of China and Russia before he talked to our biggest ally in the Middle East, Bibi Netanyahu. Obviously, this is reminiscent of the relationship that President Obama had with Bibi Netanyahu, and a real about face from the relationship that President Trump had with Bibi Netanyahu. So it was no accident that it took this long to make the call. Both Bibi was waiting. Many were just, in anticipation of when will he make the call and why hasn't he made the call? As to the contents of the call, they allegedly spoke about the pandemic, the peace plan, going forward, the relationship between the two nations, and it was a very warm conversation. That's what Bibi Netanyahu reported, and hopefully we'll see a continuation of a more than decent relationship between the two countries going forward.
There are reports surfacing that the country of Qatar is trying to facilitate dialogue between the United States and Iran, advocating that both sides need to return to the 2015 nuclear deal to help reduce tensions.
Isn't that nice of them? Qatar is known to be this playing both sides in the Middle East, meaning they have try to side with the Sunnis as well as the Shiites, and that just doesn't work. Particularly when you're talking about siding with the Iranian regime, which is not well regarded in the Sunni circle in the region. And now that the United States, with President Biden at its helm, will potentially return to a deal, there's no way, and President Biden has said this, that we'd go back to a 2015 deal. 2015 allowed for sunset clauses. It put us at the position that we're at right now, which is a 1 yard line position from having a nuclear weapon. Now, Qatar wants to be relevant the way that Oman was relevant during the 2015 nuclear talks. And it's all nice and dandy, but we have to look at the facts. And a lot has happened since 2015. And as much as the Biden administration is showing a lot of eagerness to get back into the deal, President Biden has also said that we will not drop the sanctions before we see some sort of action and collaboration by the Iranian regime to reduce their uranium enrichment before we go any further. So there's a lot of twists and turns, a lot of contradictions within the Biden administration with regards to how we will move forward. It looks like we unfortunately will move forward into some sort of deal, but hopefully this will have a lot of more preconditions than the previous one, and Qatar will just have to sit by on the sidelines, I think, for this one.
The U.S. has charged 3 North Koreans with the theft of more than $1.3 billion in a scheme involving banks and various businesses, Lisa, and the 3 are not yet in custody.
Yeah, this is a crazy story when you look at the details. These individuals have been involved in cyber hacks before. They are well known, and as you said, they're not in custody just yet. But imagine having that kind of apparatus where you're able to easily and stealthily steal $1.3 billion. They were involved in a hack that involved Sony before and the UK health ministry. So they're well known, and as one expert put it, North Korea has turned into basically this like surveillance state with a flag. So they have eyes all across the world. They have apparatuses set up all across the world, and yet they are not playing by the rules. They did not warrant relations with the U.S. the way that Donald Trump was hoping they would, and they continue to be the rogue nation that they are.
It almost sounds like a Hollywood script, doesn't it? $1.3 billion, not million, but $1 billion. Wow.
Crazy story.
Social media giant Facebook has blocked Australian users from sharing or viewing news content on its platform, Lisa. Several government health and emergency pages were also blocked, and it all has to do with a new law down under?
Yeah, so Australians are saying, we're going to call the shots against big tech. They'll have to pay for the news content that they put on their sites. They can't just put free news up on their social media platform, and we're going to block them if they refuse to. So that's exactly what happened. So Australians woke up to a very different interface on Facebook. This is upsetting for a lot of people, particularly baby boomers, a lot of whom get their news, unfortunately, get their news from social media platforms like Facebook. And that's where they share their news, that's where they get their news, and unfortunately they will not be able to do that on Facebook, at least until we figure something out.
Any chance the same law would be coming to the United States?
We haven't heard anything, but we do know that there are certain groups that are targeting big tech. Right now, the governing party isn't one of those groups because it's been benefiting them. The latest I've heard about big tech censorship is actually now they're going to be flagging posts that talk about global warming. Remember, they used to flag posts, and they still continue to flag posts whether it's about COVID because they want to stop misinformation or from it becoming political, which it already had been at that point, and also about election interference or election fraud. Any posts about those two topics would always be flagged with some sort of disclaimer. Now we're hearing that any posts that talk about global warming will also be fact-checked, or there will be a disclaimer. So we're actually letting big tech get away with more, not less. I don't know if we're going to be going the way of Australia anytime soon here.
The U.S. government is going to be delivering $200 million to the World Health Organization, and this is to fulfill contributions which were delayed under the Trump administration. Tell me more about that.
Hal, it's awful. You know, Donald Trump was very much against giving money to these acronym organizations that were just do nothing. He withdrew from the WHO, the World Health Organization, particularly when they were not being as helpful, or he deemed them not as helpful during the beginnings of the COVID pandemic. But Hal, I have even worse news for you. Today, news broke that the Biden administration has okayed taxpayer money, financial contributions to the Wuhan Virology Lab through the end of 2024.
Wow.
Yes, I read this and I had to go verify it, and I did. It's tremendous to see that the WHO made their way over to Wuhan, too little too late, but when they did make their way over about a month ago, it was said that we had a lovely trip, but we didn't find anything. Later, it was revealed that, well, they weren't exactly being transparent. That's why we aborted mission and we came home.
The epicenter of the virus, and they couldn't find anything.
Exactly. Now we're giving money, U.S. taxpayer money, to that lab in order to be what? Again, non-transparent. In order to do what? What are we paying them for? What are we getting in return? I think, you know, this administration has to go back to the playground where you give up your cookies, but you get a bag of chips. You can't just give up stuff for free and not get anything in return. It's a very basic concept, particularly with diplomacy. So yes, that's the latest. We're giving money to the WHO and to the Wuhan lab till further notice.
We live in a wild, wild world right now. Now, instead of millions of dollars, let's talk about the millions of people in Texas impacted by the power outages that were caused as a result by the nasty storms. Why did the power grid fail?
How this is such a sad story when you see these families that are affected, those who even perished in fires because they have their fire places running throughout the night, or you know, accidents are happening with grills and things like that that people are bringing into their homes to stay warm. This electric grid is meant to work to a certain level for the summers and the winters in Texas. As you know, Texas's weather is pretty predictable, hasn't been this cold in a very long time. These are record lows, and for an extended period of time. So this grid buckled basically under the demand of so many people turning on the heat that it couldn't sustain. And now people are questioning the grid. They're questioning Texas and how this even happened. Obviously, again, the weather patterns in that state have been pretty consistent. That's why the grid was functioning to a certain level. And now when we do have this outlier season, that this happened.
Lawsuits have been launched across North America in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic, and now an investigation has been launched involving nursing home deaths in New York.
Oh gosh, this is another very, very sad story. For those following this story, New York was the first place hit in the United States, very, very, very harshly with the COVID-19 virus. And it, of course, hit the nursing homes very, very badly and very harshly. And when these the people living in these nursing homes were transferred to hospitals, that's when the quarantine began. Governor Cuomo of New York said that they can go back to the nursing homes after a certain period of time. And that's when many, many more of these deaths occurred. Now, in the meantime, over the last year or so, Governor Cuomo went on with his briefings. He got an Emmy, a Daytime Emmy Award for giving these briefings. He wrote a book on how well he handled the pandemic. But just recently, one of his aides leaked to the media that they were covering up so much of this information in order to diminish the numbers of the casualties that they had at these nursing homes. She should be given a security around the clock. I would be fearful for my life if I were her. But this is awful. The truth has to come out. His Emmy has to be taken away from him. His book should be thrown into those fireplaces that we just spoke about. But this is horrific. This is horrific. And, you know, if Donald Trump brought anything to the world, love him or hate him, it should be that politicians should not come from the same bubble, that they shouldn't repeat these mistakes. They shouldn't be so fraudulent in order to get reelected, in order to, you know, it's just awful. This is a repetition of a political family just getting their political points, and people's lives are at stake. So a lot of families are very upset. And I know Janice Dean of Fox News, who's the meteorologist over there, her husband, both of his parents perished, and she has been leading the charge to a certain extent. And now she has the help of law enforcement and many others investigating alongside with her.
I have to keep so many of those families in prayers, so many families impacted by this terrible virus and the pandemic. U.S. political reporter and our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thank you, Lisa.
My pleasure.
Abortion is a topic that stirs up passion on both sides of the debate. It seems, however, that the pro-life side of the conversation is not being welcomed in the public square. Joining me now in studio today is Ruth Shaw. She's the Executive Director of National Campus Life Network in Ottawa, and we're going to discuss this very hot-button topic of abortion. Ruth, welcome to BCN.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me about your organization, NCLN. What is it all about?
Yeah, so we're a youth organization, an anti-abortion organization that works to persuade young people to reject abortion. So young people in Canada are the ones having the most abortions, and so we believe if we want to see an end to that, we need to address the demographic having them. And so the way that we do that is by localizing onto university campuses, where we mentor, train, and mobilize campus pro-life clubs to bring the abortion, anti-abortion message to campus.
Now, you believe that Canada, Ruth, will one day be abortion-free? How is that possible in a country like ours?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to happen in a short amount of time. But if you look at other movements, especially on the left and in any other sphere, where you're able to catalyze people and speak to people and get them to adopt certain life-affirming values through repeated messaging, or through, just constantly bringing the debate and exposing how bad something is, I do believe that at some point in our lifetime, we will see massive amounts of people reject abortion as more and more comes to light as to exactly how bad abortion actually is.
And you believe that young people are truly the catalysts for changing society and our mindset here in Canada? How so?
Well, I mean, to be clear, that can go either way, right? So, in our country right now, the vast majority of young people accept abortion as perfectly permissible. So if you ask the average person, as we do on university campuses, you ask them, what do you think about abortion? And they will say, oh, I'm pro-choice, just totally automatically. It's an automatic response. We've met so many young women who, when they find out they're pregnant, they automatically say, well, I'm going to have an abortion. So you can be a catalyst for change in that way too, by promoting abortion and accepting it and promoting it to your peer group. However, if you're able to convince young people to, and show them the logic and the science that proves that abortion is abhorrent, I think that young people have proven to be the demographic for years and years and years that when they're catalyzed and convicted and mobilized, they will affect great change in our country. And so we're aimed at systematically speaking to young people on a university campus and mobilizing them and giving them opportunities to speak up, just as the pro-choice movement has done with young people, which is one of the reasons that we've seen abortion last for so long in our country.
Ruth, why do you think it is that so many universities are pro-choice and they don't even want the discussion? They're not willing to welcome pro-life voices onto campus? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, so, there's obviously probably money involved somewhere, but we're also dealing with a narrative and a history in our country of abortion being on demand for a very long time. So this is now the third generation that we're seeing who just accepts abortion as totally acceptable. So, you have young people graduating and then coming into positions of leadership. And if no one is affecting that generation in some kind of massive way, then all you're going to see is the continual perpetuation of the abortion rhetoric across our country. I mean, you see that greatly with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He graduated from a university campus, McGill. He did social justice work. He was an advocate for various things, and now he's in a position of leadership promoting certain things that are, destroying the fabric of our country, namely free speech.
Now, you had an interesting experience at Carleton University. Why don't you share with the viewers what happened?
Yeah, so, quite a long time ago, 10 years ago, I was running the pro-life club on my own campus, Carleton University. And, we were aimed at bringing the dialogue to campus no matter what. And so we wanted to put on a display that showed people exactly what abortion was. And the student union and our administration really didn't like us. We were sort of infamous on campus because we wouldn't let up in our messaging. And we applied to use this space on campus to put up the display, and the administration had a big problem with that, and so they denied us the ability to use space that everyone else on campus is allowed to use. And so we said to the university, this is discrimination. It's content-based discrimination. We're tuition-paying students, so we have a right to this property, and it's not for universities to decide who gets to talk about what. Universities are meant to be a place where we can explore ideas. And if we want to see Canada remain a democracy, then we have to vehemently and protect our free speech. So they didn't like that very much, and so we said, we're going to do this in protest of the university. So we showed up with our display very peacefully, and they had called the Ottawa City Police to have us arrested, and they handcuffed us and put us in paddy wagons, and then took us to a security building on campus, and then uncuffed us, charged us with trespassing on our own campus, and then told us to go to class.
Oh my goodness.
And so we subsequently filed a lawsuit against the school for their discrimination, but unfortunately we lost because laws, courtrooms are not immune to politics, I would say.
Speaking of politics, how do you feel when leaders say the abortion debate is no longer open? Even the Conservative Party of Canada, the last election, say we're not going to reopen this debate.
Yeah. I think it's incredibly disappointing to see how far removed our politicians are from real life. In our country, a majority of Canadians want to see a restriction on abortion in late term, in the third trimester, and that was recent polling that was released through Angus. And I think you are buying into a narrative that makes them afraid to have a conversation about abortion. But our philosophy is, as is many other organizations in the movement, people are having abortions, and they're having them to the tune of $100,000 a year. So you're talking about a very serious medical procedure that we've politicized to the point where we can't even talk about it. And that's a problem. That's a health risk to women and children, obviously. There are women who are being trafficked who have abortions. There are women who are in abusive relationships who are being pressured. And we can't effectively help any of them because there's this sort of blanket over the whole thing. So long story short, they're wrong. And the more that they try to say the abortion debate is closed, the more that we'll talk about it.
Ruth, what about the, let's say, husband and wife? Let's say the wife was raped, and the husband and wife say, we don't want to have this rapist's child growing inside of my wife. That's why we're having an abortion. What do you say to a couple like that? And they both agree that they don't want to have this child, they don't want to bring this child to term.
So first and foremost, it's critical that anyone who is aiding someone in this situation is able to speak compassionately to the people who are involved, because there are 3 people involved in this situation: the baby, the mom, and the dad. And in fact, they are now parents, whether they planned to be or not. And even if there was someone else involved, this person's wife, right, she was involved. She's now a mom. And as much as that child is partially the result of a rapist, a very horrible person who's done a horrible thing, they're also partially this woman's got her DNA, and that makes them, should make them valuable to whoever is involved in the situation, even if they came from a difficult circumstance.
So it's not the baby's fault, right?
It's not the baby's fault.
So maybe just give the baby up for adoption. Maybe bring the baby to term.
Ultimately, abortion is not an eraser, and abortion cannot unrape a rape victim. And so what we say to women is that you're looking at perhaps adding trauma in an already very traumatic situation. There have been many women who've had abortions who say it felt like being raped again because the procedure is very intrusive. And not to say that it won't be extremely difficult, but if we had a woman who had been raped and she decided to keep her child, and then a year later this child starts to look like the rapist, we would not set up a clinic to allow her to go and end the life of that child because that child has the DNA of this rapist as well and looks like this rapist.
What do you say to women, though, Ruth, that say, this is my body, you have no right to tell me what to do with my own body?
Yeah, so what we often say is we ask a lot of questions. So we would predominantly ask first, is there one body or two bodies? When you're pregnant, how many bodies are there? And, you know, if you're pregnant, you know, do you have 4 arms and 4 legs? Obviously not. You're not, you know, a hermaphrodite. You're carrying someone else's body. And in our species, this is how people procreate. So it's not just your body. And so from a human rights perspective, you need to weigh the rights of both individuals, just like you would in any other situation between 2 born people. My rights end as soon as I'm going to harm you, and both are considered equal. So similarly, we need to look at the child's rights and the rights of the mom as equal. And in that way, abortion is nothing more than age discrimination because they're younger, more vulnerable human beings, and for that reason, their rights are discounted.
How did we reach this point, Ruth, that Canada became a country with no restrictions on abortion? I mean, even liberal nations like France and Sweden have gestational restrictions.
Yeah, it's a good question. So again, from my perspective, it's a historical narrative that's been passed down now generation to generation, and the result of abortion is very hidden from the public. You know, you could go, if you're not in some specific field, you could go years without knowing where the abortion clinic is in your city, or that abortions are even happening, or what is abortion at all. People have this very vague concept about what abortion is. And so for that reason, it's easy to build marketing and a narrative around something that people don't really understand. So, you know, in our work, we try extremely hard to bring the reality and the truth of abortion to young people and really get them to challenge their own preconceived notions when it comes to abortion, because most of it is just absolutely crazy. Like, we have ultrasound machines and a very clear picture and way to determine when human life begins based on science, logic, and imagery, and yet somehow this narrative has remained intact.
Has that ultrasound maybe changed women's perceptions or opinions about getting an abortion once they actually see their child inside of their bodies?
Especially in the States where there are fewer regulations in being able to have ultrasound technology in crisis pregnancy care centers or outside abortion clinics. Like, I know an organization that has set one up in a bus, and then as women are heading to the clinic, they ask them like, hey, why don't you just get checked first? And then they're able to convince them to have an ultrasound, and it's had an incredible ability to change women's minds. And I know so many stories like that where once they actually are able to see either what an abortion is or the ultrasound image of their own child and their own offspring, their minds change.
You know what's interesting too, Ruth, is that recent studies have shown that Canadians, though the majority of Canadians are pro-choice, they're actually against gender-selective abortions.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's a bit of a difficulty if you are pro-choice, which is, you know, based on the narrative of women's rights, and yet you promote and support the killing of young women in the womb. You can't have it both ways. Although on university campuses, we have met pro-choice people who justify gender selection under women's rights and choices, and to which we often ask, so women should have the right to kill other women if it's for their own empowerment. You can't have it both ways. So I think pro-choice people who are more reasonable do see that there's a problem with using abortion to kill women. And we're, you know, in China and India, this is certainly proven to be a problem. It's nothing more than dehumanization. And, you know, similarly, there are a lot of pro-choice people who I think would oppose late-term abortion, at least from our experience on campus, and certainly the polling suggests that most reasonable people can see, okay, like if she's in crisis at first, you know, or, you know, having those conversations, but once the baby's viable, all those arguments fall apart. Not that they were very good to begin with, but they become far less understandable.
Sometimes people as well, Ruth, they want to have an abortion when they find out that their child maybe has Down syndrome. You know, there's some real physical challenges with this child. What do you say to that couple?
Well, again, you know, what we've typically said is, would you have the same mentality with a born child who has disabilities? Now, problematically in our country, some people probably would say, you know, end their life as well. So what we try to do is explain value, and we explain that, you know, there are varying, you know, just variables or characteristics that change through the course of your life. And we need to eliminate suffering and not sufferers. And frankly, people with Down syndrome are some of the happiest people that I have ever met, and they bring so much joy and color to our world. And if the left truly wants to be diverse and, you know, identity politics and really value people based on who they really are, then certainly this hypocrisy around abortion when it comes to disabilities is just absolutely ridiculous and needs to change.
I know a couple in Edmonton, they had to wait 3 years to adopt because there was a shortage of babies.
Wow.
So doesn't that make sense then to have the babies, to bring them to term, eliminate abortion, and then bless these families that want to have children and adopt kids?
Yeah, it's a very
have the opportunity, right?
Yeah, very interesting that many people who support abortion are also against adoption, and they say, well, you're going to have a child out there. How traumatic is that? Well, I mean, abortion is extremely traumatic to go through, yet we don't talk about it as a trauma, which adds another trauma to that situation. But yes, you know, I myself was adopted as a baby from India, and I think that, you know, people would be blessed to adopt, and certainly there are more couples waiting to adopt children than there are children in Canada.
Ruth Shaw, Executive Director of National Campus Life Network out of Ottawa. Thanks for joining us here in studio today.
Thank you so much for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.